Hello again, and welcome back to the course Life of Christ. We're still in the Sermon on the Mount, and we're continuing on with class 20, where Jesus talks about money and how Christians can and should use it. In the last class, we looked at several passages in the sermon and then also outside the Sermon on the Mount to describe some of the principles that Jesus mentions about how to use money. And we ended up the class with a pretty sobering reflection on the amount of need in the world versus perhaps how much we're responding to that need. And I mentioned that I hate it when people try to manipulate me or make me feel guilty, and I certainly don't want to do that with you. I don't like to feel scolded, and I'm sure that you don't like to either. And so we're going to try to avoid that by looking at just certain practical options of things that you can do if you choose, and there's many others as well, so that you can use your money to bless other people. And of course, many of you watching this video, maybe all of you watching it, are already using your money to bless other people, and that's commendable, and I want you to continue to do that. But there are certain kinds of suggestions that we need to keep in mind as we're thinking about how to spend our money. Again, in the book of Randy Alcorn, Money, Possessions, and Eternity, he talks about the difference between a simple and strategic lifestyle. For example, he says simple could mean that we reject a computer as too expensive or too complex or too modern. We could say, we don't need a computer to do what we need to do. Jesus didn't have a computer, and so we can save, several hundred or a couple of $1,000s and use that to help other people. And that's true. We could do that. But Alcorn points out that perhaps thinking about a computer, think about it in strategic terms, and that would mean that the computer could serve as a tool for kingdom purposes, and that if we spent several $100s on a computer, that resulted in much more ministry being done and many more people being blessed, then that's a strategic use of that money, and it's actually a use that God would approve, right? So we could save the money, and that would be fine by not buying one. But if we think strategically, we may be able to bless more people, okay? Another example of this, very simple, would be some people would say, well, I don't need a microwave in order to cook. I can eat simply. I can make things without heating them up or whatever. Saves time, saves money. And again, that's true. You can do that. Jesus didn't have a microwave either. But again, if you think strategically, if you save $100 to $200 on a microwave, that's good. But then how much more time will you use preparing food that you might be able to use in kingdom service of different kinds, right? If you use 2 minutes to heat something up instead of taking 45 minutes to prepare something, then maybe you can bless even more people. So again, simple or strategic. Or a third example, some people feel like it's wasteful to take vacations. It may cost several $1,000s and take a week or 2 or 3 out of time that could be spent serving other people. And yet, again, that's true. And, many people didn't take the kind of vacations we're thinking about. But at the same time, if you never, ever have a Sabbath, in a sense, for your family, if you never take those breaks, then you'll get burned out and then be no use to anyone in God's service. And God talks about this quite a bit in the law, the idea of rest in the law once every week, then once every several weeks for different festivals. Some of those lasted up to 2 weeks. And so God was very serious about his people having time off from work on a regular basis. And so again, simple versus strategic. Now, this doesn't always mean that you always end up buying what you want or doing what you want, because sometimes there will be some things we buy that are not simple or strategic. They're just maybe wasteful when we think about better ways to use them. And again, each person has to think about these things in their own way. But sometimes we make ourselves feel guilty about having certain things or tools that could be helpful in the kingdom, more helpful than not having them. So something to think about there. I wanted to mention also several different opportunities, very concrete opportunities to give and serve. And this is where you can probably add 100 more opportunities to this list. There's a place in Abilene called Global Samaritan that when there are disasters around the world, they send containers, these big kind of containers you see on the back of semis, right? And they fill them up with all kinds of goods and send them to places that have had famines or earthquakes or hurricanes or tornadoes. And one of the things they put in them is a water purifier. And it's only about, that big. It looks like a big long straw. It's a little kind of a packet. And if you have one of those, you can put that straw, the end of it, into any water source, a creek, a lake, a pond, whatever. And as you suck water up through it, it purifies it, and it does so for about a month. And those things cost about $10. So you think about that, for $120, you could provide clean drinking water to somebody for a year, which is a great deal, or for a community for a short-term time. So things like that, there's others and other groups that do those, but that's a very economical way you could spend some money. If you only have $10 or $20, then that's a good gift that you can give. World Vision puts out a gift catalog, especially around Christmas, and you can find it online at this website here. And they have things in the catalog like goats or chickens, different kinds of animals or tools that you can buy for needy families that will help them provide an income for their families on an ongoing basis. Instead of just giving $10 or $25 or $50, if you give them a chicken, then you've provided food for quite a bit of time with the eggs, and being able to sell some of the eggs, you provided income. So there's different levels of giving you can use with that. Also, there's a place called kiva.org, and they work with microloans, trying to help set up men and women in developing countries with small loans, maybe as small as $25 or $100 or $300 to set up businesses in their communities. So again, they sustain themselves and their family on an ongoing basis. And then they repay those loans a little bit at a time, maybe $1 or $2 at a time. And then that money, as they repay it, goes back into your account at kiva.org, and then you can reloan it out to somebody else. And we've done that, and it's interesting to see how that works. And you can go and you can pick any country and any person, any kind of project. You can pick as much or as little as you want to give, and then they give you updates on how it's going. They tell you when they've achieved their goal. They tell you when they've repaid part of the money, and they suggest you reloan it back out. And so that's all very interesting. And we're it's called. It's not just about bread, about can become a foster parent or even adopt a child. Now that's obviously a lot bigger commitment. It requires a lot more time and training. It means welcoming people into your home and maybe turning your own home life upside down in a sense. But again, it's one of the things that's most needed. I have a friend who's a family judge here in this town, and he talks about the tremendous needs just in a town of 100,000 people that there are for the CPS, the Children Protective Services, all the families that are falling apart because of drugs, especially meth, the great needs that are there, and the children that are just kind of stacking up in a sense with the state because their parents have been deemed unfit, and there's a great need for people to be foster parents or adopt children. So that's another major investment you could do. And then you have Living Water International. It's just an example of one organization that provides water wells from places all over the world. They'll go into a village, drill a well maybe in 7 days. They'll teach people, how to use it, and then along with it, they'll train one of the leaders in the villages as kind of a minister, and they'll tell the story of Jesus. And when people say, "Why are you doing this for us?" they'll say, "Well, because of Jesus." And they tell the stories of Jesus in an oral fashion. They don't even necessarily take Bibles because sometimes they don't have Bibles in the languages, but they'll transmit the key gospel stories about Jesus. And so along with the well, they plant the gospel. And they've done this for literally thousands of communities all over the world, and they're going strong. So you can look up them. They have a walk for water that you can do one time a year, or you can do a pledge. And then, there's many others that are doing great work. You always want to check out whatever charity you want to help with Charity Navigator or other places. Just GuideStar is another place you can go to make sure that the organizations are legitimate and are actually using your money for what they say they're using it for. I'm sure many other opportunities to give. And so this is the kind of thing that I like, because if somebody tries to say you're not giving enough and there's so much more need, I don't want to just feel guilty. I want to do something. So these are a number of options that you can take with that. I want to tell you a couple of stories also. There's a man named George Mueller, and he is a man who lived back in 1805, from 1805 to 1898, a pretty long life there. And when George Mueller was 23, he was going into the ministry, and he decided at that point, he felt like the Lord was telling him not to take any salary for his ministry. He didn't want to be a paid pastor or reverend or preacher. And so at the age of 23, he said, okay, Lord, if you want me not to take money or not to take collections up or not to tell people about my financial needs, then I'll ask you to provide for me, and I'll trust that you'll do that. And so for the next 70 years or so, he never asked anything from anybody. He never passed the basket. He never did fundraising. He never put out a special needs call. Even when people would say, hey, George, we want to help you. How much do you need? He would tell them, whatever you feel like the Lord wants you to give, then you can give that. And he said that it was amazing how many times that what the person gave matched exactly what he needed. Said just time after time after time. And so for 70 years, he did that, and God provided for all of his needs, and not just his, but many others. Now, that would be impressive enough if it was just that, if it were just that God took care of him. But then he said, I wanted to show the world somehow that God would provide for his people, that God would not fall down on this promise of, if you seek first the kingdom, then he'll add all these things to you. And so he began an orphanage in his town, and he started out with 30 children in one house. And over time, those 30 children grew to 10,000 orphans during his lifetime. And the house became 5 large buildings, a large orphanage. And he provided also, along with the orphans, for hundreds of employees that would take care of the orphans as well. He also, as a part of this, began the Bible Knowledge Institute, because he wanted people to know about God as they were growing up in these orphanages, and he wanted the employees to be godly people. And so he began this school and educated thousands more people about God and the Bible. And then as part of it, he said, well, if we believe in God, then we should give also. And so we should support God's work in other places. And so he supported hundreds of mission works all over the world, coming out of himself and the people and the orphans. As part of supporting his mission works, he printed and distributed millions of Bibles and tracts, again, all around the world in those places. And he inspired thousands of people to become evangelists and promoted revivals among his town and his country and other places in the world. That to me is just amazing. I mean, just he alone trusting God would have been amazing. But the results of saying, God, can I test you in this and see if you'll take care of other people too? And God just responded abundantly. He gave one example of this. He said one day he led a little girl by the hand to the dining room of the orphanage. And the table was set, all the chairs were ready, the plates were there, the cups were there, the silverware, but there was no food. And they looked in the kitchen, and there was no food in the kitchen. And so the girl was like, well, isn't it time for breakfast? Where's the food? And he said to the girl, look what God will do. So the children came in, and they lined up behind the chairs, and they're ready for the prayer and ready for breakfast. And so Mordecai lifts his hands, and he prays, Father, thank you for what you will give us to eat. And you know that the children were sitting there looking around, trying to see where the food was going to come from, because they were probably skeptical about it. It says at that moment, someone knocked on the door, and when they opened it, the neighborhood baker was there. He said, I couldn't sleep last night because I thought you might not have bread for breakfast, and the Lord wanted me to bring you some. So I got up at 2 a.m. and I've been cooking bread ever since, and here's the bread. And he brings the bread in, and it was more than enough for the children to have for breakfast. And then after the baker left, just then the milkman came to the door and said his wagon had broken down in the street. And so he asked if he could offload the milk from his wagon and give the milk to the children so that he could repair the wagon. And you think, wow, what a great story. And Miller said this happened many, many times, that arriving just at the exact moment for a need without, any knowledge of how things would happen, how God would provide, that God would bring things at the exact time and the exact amount. This is from a book called Delighted in God by Roger Steer on page 161. So again, many, many times that this happened in Miller's life. So as you get to the end of Miller's life, somebody totaled up what he had done and what he had given. It says in his life, Miller received 93,000 pounds for his personal use, pounds in English money, right? Which is quite a bit, right? It's at least maybe $2 or $3 at that time. And so, maybe 186,000 or 200,000 or so dollars, which back in the 1800s is a lot of money. It says he gave away about 81,000 pounds of it to others. So that's, I don't know what the math is on that, probably about 8 nights or so. It says when he died, he had only 150 pounds, including the value of his belongings. In his life, Muller received almost 1.5 million pounds for the orphanage and for other projects. And the striking thing is that most of that arrived just in time to meet the needs. In today's money, allowing for inflation and the exchange rate of pounds to dollars, the money Muller received in all is equal to at least 134 million pounds or $209 million at the exchange rate of just a little while ago. $209 million, and most of it coming just as the result of prayer, because he would get up and pray, say, Lord, you know what I need, and then the Lord would send it. And as I mentioned before, his purpose as he started this project through the orphanage both pagans and Christians that God exists, and that as a good father, he takes care of his children and provides for their needs. And so even though, taking care of the kids or teaching and distributing the Bible and tracts in the Institute, none of that was his primary purpose, yet through trusting God to do this, God really provided everything else. And so again, he was a living example of seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. Matthew 6:33. That's one story. That's just super impressive, and I feel nowhere near George Muller. I can't imagine having that much faith and never even telling people, even when they ask what you need. I don't think necessarily that's the pattern for all fundraising or all people that are in ministry, and yet it's something that God really proved to him in his particular case, and it became a source of faith for him. There's a second story about a guy named Robert Morris, and this guy's still alive. He's actually a preacher for the Gateway Church in Dallas. So one of these mega churches, probably has 20 or 30,000 members. But he says when he was a younger preacher, he was a traveling evangelist, and he would go to a church and he would give a campaign, maybe several days or a couple of weeks. And on the last day of the campaign, they would give a collection and call it a love offering, and they would give him whatever was in the collection. And he would take that and he would live on that until the next campaign. And as you know, often those collections aren't huge. And so many times he was living from month to month. He says he arrived and there was this one month where he only had one campaign scheduled. And it was kind of in the middle of the summer. And he was kind of uneasy about it. And he said, Lord, you know that this is the only one I've got scheduled this month. And so when we get done, please make sure that the collection is enough for me to live on the whole month, because I really need it. Kind of reminding God of things he already knew. And so he finishes the campaign, and they took the collection and they gave him the check there, and it was enough to cover the month. And so he sat down, and the announcements were still going on, and he was just so grateful. He was thanking the Lord for providing for him again for another month. But one of the announcements as the service went on was by a missionary who was describing the work that he was doing in his mission point. And Robert Morris says he began to feel like, as he listened to the missionary, that God wanted him to take the collection check that he got for his whole month and give it to the missionary for his work. And so he says he started to argue with God in his mind. He's like, God, but this is my money. This is what I got. This is my only campaign. And if I give this away, I won't have anything. Then what will I do for the rest of the month? And he said, but I couldn't avoid it. And so at the end of the service, he got up, and without telling anybody about it, he went over to the missionary and quietly gave the check to him, endorsed it over to him, and walked away. Then he says there were several people that went out to lunch with Morris and his wife. And so one guy was sitting across from Robert Morris at the lunch table, and he said, so the check that you got, was it enough to cover your needs for the month? And Morris didn't want to tell the guy what he'd done because, left hand, right hand. And so he said, yes, it was enough, which was true, right? He just didn't tell him he gave it away. And so the guy says, well, let me see it. And so Morris still didn't want to tell him. So he says, my wife has it. He says, well, go get it from her. And so he gets up and he goes over to his wife. And of course, she doesn't know anything about it. So he said, hey, honey, how's it going? How's your food? And goes back and sits down and says, she says she doesn't have it. She says it's in the car. And the guy says, well, go to the car and get it. I want to see it. And so finally, Morris has to admit, well, I really felt like the Lord wanted me to give it to this missionary. And so I did. And he felt kind of foolish saying it. He thought maybe the guy would be mad at him. And the guy said, I thought that's what you did. And he reaches into his pocket and he takes out a check that he had made out before the service started that day and gave it to Morris for his expenses. And it was 10 times the amount to the penny of the collection that had been taken that day. Now, that's not coincidence. You can't just make that stuff up. And the interesting thing about this is that Morris said that from that point on, it was as if that freed him from worrying about God taking care of him. He always knew that God would. He always preached that God would, but he still struggled with it at those moments like he saw. And so he said, from that moment on, I believe that God would take care of me. And there were at least 3 times in our ministry, it says that my wife and I have given away everything we have because we thought God wanted us to do it. And then God has replaced everything we needed. He says we've received cars and used them for a while, then given them away when God pointed out who we should give it to. And he received houses and given away houses to people that needed them when God indicated it to him. It says one time he even got a plane and the use of a pilot for a year and used that and then gave it away again when he felt like God wanted him to. He says in general, he usually gives away around 50% of his salary every month. And he's not saying that to brag. He's just saying, I want you to be able to trust God. Because when God says, test me in this to see if I won't throw open the gates of heaven or the windows of heaven and bless you, that God is not lying. God is not a stingy God. He's not a God who scrimps and makes his children suffer. When God says, seek first the kingdom and I'll take care of you, then he means it. And again, just like with George Miller, I read that story and I'm just amazed because I don't feel that faithful. And I've got some stories about God's provision, but nothing like those stories. And so I think, again, it's just a great example and a great challenge for us to see what would it be like if we trusted God completely to take care of us. Now, I want to go on to another passage that we know well. First of all, in John 10, Jesus talks about being the good shepherd. And of course, he talks about being the gate for the sheep as well. He talks about how he knows the sheep and the sheep know him. How he can call the sheep and the sheep will come to him. Even if they're mixed in a larger flock of sheep, his sheep will hear his voice and follow him because they know him. But they won't follow a stranger because they don't know his voice. You know, that's in John 10, verses 5, 16, 27, and other passages too. And then We have the passage in Matthew 6, where verses 25 through 34, where Jesus says, don't worry about food or clothes or anything, because God knows you need those things, and he'll provide them for you, right? And he provides for birds and for flowers in the field. How's he not going to provide for you too? And so again, this whole idea of trusting the shepherd. And then you have the idea of Psalm 23, and how it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. He makes me lie down in green pastures. And a famous verse, one that we believe, and we really do. We don't just say we believe it, we do. But sometimes our idea of green pastures is more like this, right? This is a shot of the Sea of Galilee, and we're sitting up about where the Sermon on the Mount may have taken place. And so you can look at this and imagine Jesus' words in Matthew 6. Look at the lilies of the field, how they grow, they don't toil or spin. And yet I say that not even Solomon in all his glory was arrayed as one of these. Look at the birds of the air. They don't, gather or reap or store in barns, and yet my heavenly Father provides for them. And so you can imagine how the people looked around at this and, wow, that's really true. This is a picture of abundance, a lot of water, a lot of grass, abundance. This is months of grass for a flock of sheep. But when you look at Psalm 23 and you think David wrote that, he wrote it in Bethlehem. And if you go to Bethlehem, Bethlehem is right on the border between kind of the fertile plains of Judea and the desert, the Judean desert. It's right about at the dividing line. In fact, there's parts of Bethlehem you can be in desert and then just walk or drive a little bit, and you're more in the plains. And it looks more like this. This is actually part of the Negev desert, which begins down near Bethlehem. And if you look around, there's a little bit of grass, but that's a lot of sheep. And in the distance, you don't see much grass at all. And you think, that grass isn't going to last very long. And then you look at the sheep and think, they don't know anything. They don't know how to find grass or water or shelter. They're completely dependent on me. And then one time we were down there and we were driving near Jerusalem, between kind of Jerusalem and Jericho. And we just took this picture out the window. You see some Bedouin tents that probably looked like that 2,000 years ago. And then you see these flocks of sheep. Now, I mean, look at that. You got to figure and all of the area around this looks like this. And you think, what are they feeding these sheep? Okay. And so that's the question, where is the shepherd going to find food and water for that many sheep, not just one or two, but that many in that desert? It's just a real life question. And right about when I was thinking wow, how does the shepherd provide for the sheep? We kind of rounded a corner and we saw this. We saw McDonald's just kind of come up like an oasis out in the desert there. And I couldn't resist getting out and taking a picture there and going inside. And I took another picture just of the girl in the menu, because it's in Hebrew. And I'm sure she thought I was just crazy, who does that? But all along I was thinking, okay, it's easy for us to say we're hungry and we stopped here, I think, for like a milkshake or something. And yet the Bedouin shepherds don't have the McDonald's right there. So again, you come back and you say, then how are we providing for these sheep? And so the green pastures that Psalm 23 is likely talking about is something vastly different than our image out of, say, like, a field full of grass. And it's that in that area, the wind blows in over the Mediterranean Sea during the day and in toward the evening. And as it blows in over the water, it kind of gets some of that water that humidifies, and it brings dew. And that dew falls down and gathers on the rocks on the hillsides there, on the hills and the slopes of the desert there in Judea. And then when the dew gathers on the rocks, then it collects in little drops and it falls down into the earth. And there are little bitty seeds, little bits of grass that are watered by these drops, and they sprout quickly. They're very small. They're not like whole tufts of grass or patches of grass. It's just like one little tuft, one little plant, and it doesn't last more than a few hours. The sun eventually comes out and withers it away. And so the trick is to have a shepherd who, when he's bringing his sheep, knows where that's happening. And he knows that in certain areas, there's going to be little tufts of grass that are there waiting for the sheep to be eaten. Okay? And so he'll take the sheep up to one of those and he'll show them the grass. And the sheep will eat that. Then the sheep finishes it, and then the shepherd will take him to the next tuft and the next tuft, and that way feeds the sheep. It's a pretty active process that lasts a good part of the day. And the same thing, he knows where the water is as well that's safe for them. And so we find out really that green pasture is not a huge storehouse of food. It's not a huge pasture that's actually chock full of grass that's a foot high. Green pasture is enough for that day. And you think about, again, the Lord's Prayer in the Sermon on the Mount, give us this day our bread for a month. Doesn't say that. Our bread for a year. Give us this day a savings account and insurance policy. It says, give us this day our daily bread. And that is at the same time so reassuring, and it also very scary, because I personally don't like to be in a situation where I only have enough money for that day or enough food for that day, and I don't know about tomorrow. With a family, that's a scary situation to be in, and probably most of you feel the same way. We prefer to have the full pantry, the full refrigerator, the full bank account, and yet Jesus says, look, when you're praying, here's what you need to pray. Give us this day our daily bread. And if you look at that, that's in about verse 5 and following. Then you go over later on in the same chapter 6, and that's where the passage is about seek first the kingdom, and all these things I'll add to you. So it's a mirror. You have, the Lord saying, your will be done, your name be glorified, and then please help me with my needs. And then over later in the chapter, I'm seeking your kingdom first, please provide my needs. It's a mirror of what Jesus is saying in both places. So this makes us really change our relationship with God and with Jesus, because instead of saying, bless me in certain ways, help me get a job, and then I'll take care of myself the rest of my life, or give me good health and I'll take care of my family the rest of my life. God wants a more day-by-day, personal, intimate relationship with us. And sometimes if we tend to drift away from him or get distant from him because things are coming between us and him, because we rely more on money or things or positions or work or health more than him, sometimes he'll take advantage of circumstances that deprive us of those and say, come back to this more daily, intimate relationship I want to have with you. And so really, at the end of the day, we don't need pasture, we need a pastor. We need a shepherd who can be with us day by day, even moment by moment, mouthful by mouthful, and God says, I will provide for you. Just trust me. So again, the first question we started with in this two-part class, do we think we can trust God enough so that we give away what we have now, trusting he'll provide what we need? And these kinds of stories show, yes, we can trust God. He is trustworthy, and he's proven himself to be trustworthy through the years. The question is, what am I going to do with that? Am I going to make him that kind of a day-by-day shepherd that I can trust every day? So I hope that you'll think about this and reflect on it. I hope that you'll talk about it with your spouses and family and friends, among other church members. It's a difficult topic, and that's one of the reasons we need a church, so that we can get wisdom from a number of different people to see how best to obey Jesus in this difficult area. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next class.